I read 18 books in February, plus 3 short stories and deleted scenes, and here are my thoughts on all of them. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. I'm here with my February wrap-up today. This month flew by compared to January, but it's also a shorter month and I had a lot of personal celebrations going on, so that's probably why, but I did get a lot of reading in, and so many of the books that I read this month were some of my top reads. Lots of 4.5 and 5-star reads. I can't wait to go through them all with you guys. But first we have some statistics from my reading this month. In February, I read 6,689 pages and listened to 149 hours. Once again, the majority of the books that I read this month were audiobooks, 52%, and then 29% were digital and 19% were print reads. The percentage of where I got my books from was pretty similar to last month. 55% of my reads were from Libby, 10% were from Libro.fm, BookBub, and NetGalley, and then 5% were either a print copy or from Spotify or Hoopla. Okay, starting off with my first read of the month, I read an arc of Crazy Little Thing Called Love. I read most of this in January, but I ended up finishing like the last part of it in February. This is the third and final book in the Sun Tower series, which is an interconnected, standalone, contemporary romance series. The characters are from several different Pakistani Canadian families, and the characters are all like friends or siblings or cousins with each other. This book in particular follows Rais and Zanira, who are a newly wedded couple in an arranged marriage. But Rais has actually known Zanira for 6 years before they got married, but Zanira didn't know Rais back then. They used to attend the same university when Rais was completing his PhD and Zanira was there for undergrad, and Zanira would perform at their campus cafe because she was really into music, and one day Rais saw her perform there and just immediately became smitten with her. I don't want to spoil what happens in the 6 years between Rais first laying eyes on Zanira and then them eventually getting married, but just know that I have so many highlights in my arc of Rais just being so pathetically down bad for his wife. It's a pretty drawn out slow burn, and like the book is long, but it's truly the sweetest romance I have ever read. Honestly, to be loved the way that Rais loves Zanira in this book is such a blessing, and I can only hope to experience that kind of love in a new marriage. Yeah, this book is easily 5 stars, plus this cover and just like the jacket of this paperback is so cute. I love the green. I love the two of them on the front cover, but all of the covers in Versace's books are so cute. Anyway, I was very glad that I started off the month with a 5-star read. Next, I read an arc of Nevermore by Jade Hernandez. This is a novella set in Mexico that follows a young woman who's a student at a private school. I want to say maybe like high school or college age. She's also the daughter of a famous politician, and she's also a ballet dancer. And then our MMC is a young indigenous man who is a member of a local gang called the Raven Brothers. It's a Romeo and Juliet reimagining with dark academia elements, but also has a happily ever after, never fear. This is my 4th book by Jade Hernandez, and I really love her contemporaries. I also especially appreciate that they're pretty much all set in Mexico. For me personally, it's really important to read books that are set outside of the US to expand my own global perspective, so I really appreciate reading her books for that reason. If you're looking for a spicy new adult novella with Latina and indigenous rep, I highly recommend this one. Then I listened to my first audiobook of the month, Drown Me with Dreams. If you haven't heard of this series, it's a YA black fantasy following this world where sirens exist. Our FMC, Saoirse, is a siren, but she keeps her identity of being a siren a secret in order to protect herself and her family from being hunted down. I read the first book, Sing Me to Sleep, almost 2 years ago, so I'd forgotten a lot about what had happened in this first book. There were things that I liked and didn't like about Sing Me to Sleep, and I could probably say the same for Drown Me with Dreams as well. There was definitely way more romance in Drown Me with Dreams, which I loved. I found myself swooning so many times at the lines that were coming out of Hayes' mouth. I think my biggest gripe with this book was that I wish the ending was a bit more developed at the end. It didn't end so abruptly. And also, since I was listening to the audiobook, the narration was kind of hard to follow along. The narrator was British, and some of her pronunciations were a little hard to understand. She also made Saoirse sound very whiny, which felt very out of character for her. I also want to give up that there is a crazy, shocking scene/twist at the end of this book that made me so upset. I was not expecting it at all. But overall, I do recommend this duology. I think it's a very fun one if you're a YA fantasy lover, especially because we don't get many fantasies following sirens. I feel like they're a very cool creature to follow in mythology. The next audiobook that I listened to was The Loveler. I so desperately wanted to love this one. I really enjoyed the neighbor favor and the partner plot. They were both so cute. This one just did not hit for me. It's the 3rd book in a series of interconnected connected standalone romances following the Green sisters. The love lyric in particular is a single mother ex-singer romance. And I got really excited because it follows Iris, who is the oldest sister of the three sisters we're following. And as an oldest sister and eldest daughter myself, I was super excited to relate to her, but the chemistry she shared with Angel felt so lackluster. I also really love single parent romances, but I felt like this book didn't really play into the micro tropes that I love from these types of books. I also just generally don't vibe with celebrity romances that much, so maybe that was also a part of it. And the narration was so robotic at times. The narrators were kind of just stating what each character was doing one by one and not really putting any emotion or feeling into their dialogue or lines. So yeah, I just wasn't drawn to it at all, which is so disappointing. But I love Christina Forrest's books. I highly recommend her as an author. It just happened that this one didn't land for me. Then I read an arc of A Touch of Blood. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, also with Desi and Hindu mythology. It's a follow-up / sequel to A Drop of Venom. I loved A Drop of Venom. It's one of my favorite YA fantasies, and so I was very excited to read A Touch of Blood next. I still think I like A Drop of Venom better, and in A Touch of Blood, the expansion of the world and the rules of this world and the magic system and lore, and kind of just like the world building in general, was a little confusing to follow along at times. It was very densely packed into this book, whereas in A Drop of Venom, it was much easier to follow, but here you were kind of learning about the rules of the world alongside the characters, so maybe that was the point, that's why it was so confusing, but it was hard for me to follow along. But don't get me wrong, A Touch of Blood was still very enjoyable. Obviously these are fantasies, but there's still romantic elements to them. I will say that Hiran, our love interest in this book, was so down bad for Ishani, our main character. I highlighted so many scenes where he was just dreaming and yearning about her. It was so cute. I do wish there was a little bit more physical romance between them, but I think for YA readers this is perfect. Next, I listened to the audiobook of The Road of Bones. I had actually never heard of this series, but then Dell / Penguin Random House sent it to me and the cover looked pretty cool. And then literally a few days later, one of my mutuals was raving about this book, so I was like, okay, let me go pick it up. I only got the audiobook because Podium started putting some of their audiobooks on Hoopla, so I immediately snatched that up because before it was only exclusive on Audible. This is a Viking-inspired romance scene. While the story was engaging at times, I feel like it wasn't anything new that I've read, especially as someone who reads a ton of fantasies, including Viking fantasies. It kind of follows your standard formula of girl loses parent and then discovers she has hidden magic that's been kept a secret. She not put her life in danger. She allies herself with potential enemies to help discover the origins of her magic, but then also protect herself from the people who are trying to bring her harm. So yeah, I feel like because I've read so many fantasy books with this exact formula, I wasn't that impressed. If the audiobook of the second book does also get released in Hoopla, I'll pick it up, but if it remains an Audible exclusive, I'll probably discontinue the series. Okay, and then we got to my favorite part of the month, and that was my buddy reread of Legendborn and Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, all in preparation for Oathbound. Wait, that's actually so crazy to think about because by the time this video is released, Oathbound will be out in the world. Oh my god, I cannot think about that. That's crazy. My buddy read this with Azanta, Viv, and Kaylee. You can see some of our highlights from our buddy reread up on my Bookstagram, but we had so much fun. Speaking to Legendborn first, I read Legendborn over 4 years ago, which is so crazy to think about. Immediately when I read it, I knew it was going to be my favorite book of all time. During the second reread, it was just as excellent, if not more. I listened to the audiobook this time around, and the first time I read it, I read the ebook. The narration was excellent. I felt so immersed in the story, and I feel like I caught so many Easter eggs that I missed, obviously, like during my first read. Highly recommend rereading it in preparation for Oathbound, but if you don't have time, they've also made several videos recapping both books, the magic system, and the characters from the series. I'll link those videos in the description. And then speaking to Bloodmarked, I remembered less about this book than I did about Legendborn, I think, which is kind of weird because I read this one like over 2 years ago. All of my thoughts apply from my first read, but I will say one of the more emotional things in this book was just seeing how much Team Bree cares for and supports Bree. They love Bree so much, and it just makes my heart so happy. Like the way Alice and William and Patricia and Mariah are all in Bree's corner, and then the way that Sel and Nick would literally lay down their life if it meant that Bree got to live. I cannot deal. Of course, one of the big things that I remember for Bloodmarked is like the last 10% because that's when like everything goes down the drain and I'm just like, how are we supposed to recover from this in Oathbound? I remember feeling so empty when I first finished Bloodmarked, and that same empty feeling hit me again. But yeah, by the time this video is released, Oathbound will be out and I'll be fine. But maybe not because I feel like Tracy's gonna pull some crazy things in that book. But yeah, highly loved this reread. I cannot wait to read Oathbound. I'm so excited to see more of Bree. I'm so excited to see where her journey goes next, and I cannot cannot wait for new readers to discover this series. I'm so jealous that you guys will get to experience reading these books for the first time. Obviously Legendborn and Bloodmark were both 5-star reads for me, and because I had to keep that experience of reading a 5-star read going, I decided to pick up Audrey and Bash Are Just Friends by Tia Williams. This was an excellent read, which I'm not surprised by at all because I love Tia Williams books. Her writing is always so perfect. This book in particular is utterly hilarious. She's so good at inserting these like ridiculous phrases, whether they're referencing to things characters are doing. Sometimes it's like background characters too, sometimes it's pop culture references, but they're all done in such a witty and funny way. I found myself laughing so many times and just like highlighting the most ridiculous dialogues. And speaking to the romance between Audrey and Bash, Audrey in particular was one of my favorite characters in 7 Days in June. I was so happy to hear that we'd be getting a book following her in like a YA teen romance / coming of age story. She was 12 years old, I believe, in 7 Days of June, and now she's 16 or 17. From the very first page, I fell in love with both Audrey and Bash and their very sweet friendship turned romance. This book felt like such a true teen romance, from like the very accurate Gen Z slang to the very innocent and confusing feelings of your first love, to some of the friendship fights that feel so much more dramatic than they actually are in real life, to the overly annoying parents when you're a teenager. I can easily see so many teens relating to Audrey and her story in this book. I also found myself swooning so hard at all of Bash's confessions and his inner monologue when he's thinking about Audrey. The tension and the chemistry between the two was so good. The tattoo parlor scene, hello? Overall, I feel like Tia did an excellent job at putting yourself in a young Audrey's shoes. It was actually so interesting and honestly heartwarming to see her perspective of Eva and Shane, especially after learning their story in 7 Days of June. Now you just get to see them be like goofy, silly, lovesick parents who are very annoying to their teenage daughter. It was very fun. I cannot recommend this book enough for Tia Williams fans and also YA readers overall. This is easily going on my list of my all-time favorite YA romances. 5 stars across the board. Okay, and then after Audrey and Bash, I went back to fantasy and picked up The Scorpion and the Night Blossom by Millie Wen Zhao. I was very pleasantly surprised by this. I've loved a lot of Amelie's books, so maybe it shouldn't be that surprising, but I wasn't a huge fan of her previous fantasy duology, mainly because of the way she ended that book. That was such a criminal ending. But this is the first book in a new romantic fantasy series following a girl who lives in this kingdom where demons roam the land and feast on the flesh and souls of humans. One of these demons killed her father and then took half of her mother's soul, which left her mom kind of in this limbo between life and death. So in order to save her mom and also care for her younger sister, she enters the immortality trials to win this pill of eternal life that she'll give to her mom. What surprised me the most in this book was how heavy the romance was actually. I feel like in Amelie's previous books, the romance was more of a subplot, but here was like pretty prominently included. Perhaps this was intended more to appeal to kind of like the romantic trend that we're seeing in the book space right now, but I really loved it. There's a specific scene in particular where the main character and her enemy love interest are making out with each other, and she puts her blade to his throat and they continue making out. That was kind of crazy. And the ending, of course, does end on quite a bit of a cliffhanger, so I'll eagerly be reading book 2. This is also the like first standard edition, and it's so pretty. It has like edges, end papers, and this very beautiful foil stamp case. Such a pretty book and such a pretty fantasy as well. I think if you're really into C-dramas and non-Western fantasies overall, you'd really like this. Then I listened to the audiobook of The Rose Bargain. I should have known going into this book that this would be your standard white fae romantasy. It has a very similar plot to The Selection with the whole like bachelor vibes. The first 70% or like 80% of the book, I was so bored. I couldn't tell who the actual love interest was in this book and the plot was moving so slowly. But the last 20% was interesting. You finally get to see some POV chapters of the other contestants in this book. You find out their backstory and kind of what they've been up to from their perspective throughout these like bachelor trials. But it was very weirdly paced because all these POV chapters were kind of like smushed into the last chunk of this book. And so by that point I was already kind of fed up by the story. And then out of nowhere, the end of this book was so crazy. There was this like huge plot twist at the end of this book that I didn't see coming at all. And then all of the main characters' plans just imploded, and it was just so crazy like watching all of it play out. So yeah, the pacing definitely annoyed me. The vast majority of the book was so slow, and then bam, like all this crazy stuff starts happening at the end. And then of course you have to wait a year or two to find out what happens after the crazy cliffhanger. I also did read the author's previous YA book. I think it it's called The Witch Haven, and I wasn't a huge fan of that one. This one was probably a little better than that, but still very annoyed with the pacing. The next audiobook I listened to was I Got Abducted by Aliens and Now I'm Trapped in a Rom-Com by Kimberly Lemming. This was kind of your standard Kimberly Lemming fun monster romance. The plots of these books are always a little ridiculous, but this one follows a girl named Dorothy, or Dory, who is getting her PhD in wildlife biology, and so she's like literally on the field at this safari type landscape when she gets abducted by aliens. Yes, you heard me right. The aliens drop her onto this other planet along with one of the lions that she was observing from Earth. When she's on this other planet, the lion starts talking and they can understand each other, which was also crazy. So she and this lion, who she names Toto, they kind of team up and they run into these two other aliens, and the two aliens are our two love interests. This is a Y2 romance. Going back to Lion for a second, he was so funny. I loved his dialogue. I was laughing out loud listening to him, and I really love the way the narrator acted out his voice and played it to the comedic timing. It was so funny. The romance aspect of this book with the two aliens was also done pretty well. I don't read a ton of white shoes, but I really like when they're depicted in this case. But I feel like for monster romances, I definitely see the appeal. I'm not sure if Kimberly Lemming has more books planned out in this universe, but I'll definitely be picking them up if she releases them. Then I read Something Like Fate by Amy Lee, and I was so excited for this book. I really loved Amy's previous YA book, Woke Up Like This. I literally have it displayed right here because it's one of my favorite YA romances. I think about it all the time. But Something Like Fate did not live up to my expectations at all. My first sign should have been that this is a friends to lovers romance, and I don't usually jam with friends to lovers. I find them kind of boring. This book follows Lo, who's in her first year of college, and she goes on this backpacking trip across Italy to connect with her mother, who also visited Italy when she was younger. Her mom passed away when she was 4, so she doesn't have a strong connection to her. And at the last minute, the girl she was supposed to go with ends up backing out, so she ends up going with her best friend Teller instead. The other aspect of the story is that the maternal side of Lo's family all have this power to see visions of their soulmate. And so when Lo goes to Italy, she gets this vision of this boy she meets in Italy. So they start spending a lot of time together, and Teller helps Lo pursue him because he knows how much finding her soulmate means to Lo. But of course, as the book progresses, that's when she kind of starts to realize her feelings for Teller instead. My main issues with this book is that the middle chunk of this book is kind of boring. Find out that Teller has been in love with Lo ever since they became friends so many years ago. But then for the entirety of their friendship, he never once acted on his feelings, which made no sense to me. First of all, to me there were no clear signs that he ever liked Lo, so I don't fault Lo for not knowing or not realizing that Teller was in love with her. But then also, it didn't make sense to me how he could ever have been in love with Lo with the way he was acting. He was truly treating her just like a friend in all of their flashback scenes. I saw no signs that he was actually in love with her. I feel like guys are very obvious when they're in love with a girl. Also, usually in friends to lovers romances, they always make up some excuse like, oh, I didn't want to ruin our friendship by confessing our feelings. And to me, that never made sense, because if this person was truly your friend and someone that you turned to for support, advice, someone you were honest with about your feelings, you would tell your friend that you liked them more than a friend. Especially in this case, where Teller and Lo are supposed to be like best friends who tell each other everything. So yeah, I had a hard time believing that Teller was in love with Lo. I didn't like the way that he handled things about confessing his feelings, and I didn't really like the way he went about it, so for that reason, I did not enjoy this book that much. The next audiobook that I listened to was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty. This is recommended to me by Liv, one of my friends, who gifted this book to me for my birthday. I have heard a lot about this book, but I never picked it up because I'm not a huge fan of age gap romances, and I know this book does contain one. Basically follows this artist named Faye living in Brooklyn who gets into this very casual relationship with this guy named Nasir. And I say casual, but it's more like they're just kind of dating and not really doing anything beyond that. They don't really have a physical side to the relationship, mainly because Faye is still healing from her husband dying in a car accident 5 years ago. And Nasir is pretty supportive of Faye and supportive of her healing and doesn't really push her too hard to accelerate their relationship. One day they go to an island in the Caribbean where Nasir is from to visit Nasir's dad, who has connections to the art world. And once they reach the island and Faye meets Alim, Nasir's dad, she very quickly realizes that she is attracted to him. Alim also happens to be this celebrity chef, so at first she's like, well, do I only like him because of his status? But she realizes, no, it's actually much more deeper than that. She tries to maintain her distance when they stay on the island, but one of the things that she and Alim bond over is the fact that Alim also lost his wife, Marisol, and so they really bond over this shared grief and trauma of losing your partner. Inevitably, as they spend more and more time with each other, their bond deepens, and one day they kiss. Obviously, in real life, if my partner that I had been dating started catching feelings feelings for my parent and then acted on them, I would be very upset. But I will say that I really appreciated the way that Quickie and Maisie wrote Faye and Aleem's characters. They felt so grown and mature and honest and open about their communication and their feelings for each other. They really tried to make the best of their situation and really made sure they weren't hurting Aleem's family. I highly recommend the audiobook for this story. I feel like the narration was so well done. Faye's from Brooklyn, and then Nasir and Aleem are from this island in the Caribbean, and then Faye's best friend Joy is also from Brooklyn, and the way the narrator did the voices for each character was so distinct. I felt like I was listening to a full cast of narrators. Faye also has a hilarious relationship with her friend Joy. All of their scenes together and dialogue had me cracking up. Yeah, definitely recommend the audiobook for this if you are expecting a sort of like lit fic story, because I feel like that's kind of what the cover of this book gives off. Then you might not enjoy it because it is more focused on the romance and the relationships between the characters. I personally love a Quickie and Maisie's writing, and so that translated for me really well in this book. I'm very excited to read So Medina by them in March, so I'll definitely be continuing the Quickie and Maisie fan train. The next audiobook that I listened to was Be Mine Forever by Kennedy Ryan. I talked about the first two books in this series in my January wrap-up. This is the third book in the Bennett series. In my January wrap-up, I mentioned how Cam, who is the MMC in this book, Be Mine Forever, was kind of irredeemable for me in the first two books, so I wasn't really sure how I would root for him. Cam is the best friend of the MMC in the first two books, Walsh, and also the ex-husband of the FMC in the first two books, Karis. So it's kind of a tricky situation, but once again, with Kennedy Ryan's magic, I was able to root for Cam. The FMC in this book, her name is Jo. You find out in the first two books that she has been in love with Cam since they were kids, but she never really confessed her feelings to him because he was always dating someone else and never showed any interest in her. But Cam had an inkling at the back of his head that she liked him, and he really liked her too, but he just didn't think he was the right guy for her. And then finally now, 17 years later, they rekindle their relationship, and then finally now, 17 years later, they rekindle their friendship and then start acting on their more than friends feeling. The romance is very sweet, but a lot of the romance included a lot of healing from Cam's part. This book deals a lot with child molestation and child sexual abuse, so if those are major triggers for you, I would not pick up this book. There are a few on-page scenes, but I think it did add a lot of insights into Cam's character and backstory. Cam really has to work on himself and attend therapy and make sure that he's the right person for Jo as someone who has dealt with so much abuse and trauma. But once he got through all of that, the romance, even in spite of that, the romance in this book hits so hard. I loved all the dialogue that he shared with Jo. And it's crazy because I feel like this series is some of the best romantic scenes by Kennedy, even though she's been in so many incredible romances. This book was also narrated by Zachary Weber, who is one of my personal favorite narrators, so I really love the narration there. And it was just really heartwarming at the end of this book to see Walsh and Karis and then Cam and Jo come together as this unique, non-traditional family, especially considering all of the emotional drama that went on in the first two books. I really love seeing their reconciliation in this book, and I'm very excited for the fourth book. And then at the end of the month, I fell into this Melanie Singh obsession. I picked up Slave to Sensation, Whisper of Sin, and Wild Invitation, plus a few other short stories and deleted scenes from the Sight Changeling universe. Melanie Singh is coming to a Polycon, so I thought I'd pick up the series in preparation. I did read the Guild Hunter series a few years ago, and I don't think that one was really my cup of tea. I did love her contemporary series. I haven't checked out her thrillers yet, but I feel like most of her fans really love the Sight Changeling series, so I was like, you know what, let me just pick it up and see how I like it. You guys, I became so obsessed. Let me set this world for you if you haven't heard of the series or picked up any of the books. So these books are set in the future in a world where civilization is split into three separate races. We have the humans, who are just, you know, regular humans. They are considered the weakest in society. And then we have changelings, who are essentially animal shifters. So think like wolf shifters, leopards, cats, bear shifters, etc. They live in packs, they have alphas, but they still kind of have like day-to-day jobs as well. And they play different roles in their own packs too. Aside from the alphas, you also have like healers, you have sentinels, and one of the main things about their race is that they really value family connection, relationships. They also have like mates, you know, they mate for life. The mating bond is like a very pivotal part of their life. And so overall they feel a lot of emotions. They rely very heavily on physical touch. And then our last race are the Sai. We're considered the strongest race in society. And Sai are humans with all of their emotions from their mind wiped. They do not have any emotion whatsoever, and because of that they think that they're mentally stronger than changelings and humans. It's kind of like that, oh, having emotion makes you weak sort of thing. And the way the Psy were created is that back in like the 1900s, the Psy created this thing called the silence, which is the thing that like erases all of the emotion from your mind. And they're also connected to each other through something called the Psy network. And that's how some of the mental programming gets infiltrated into the minds of the Psy. They can also do things like talk to each other telepathically. They're connected to other people through the Psy network in their minds. And so that's kind of like the foundation of the series. The first book that I read, Slave to Sensation, follows a Psy woman named Sasha who has a secret, and that is that she can actually feel emotion. And this is a really big no-no for the Psy, because if the Psy find out that you are a Psy and you somehow can feel emotion, they'll put you through this process called rehabilitation, which is a much more invasive and harmful procedure than undergoing the silence. It like completely eradicates your emotional psyche. So she keeps the fact that she can actually feel emotions a secret, and one day she's assigned to pair up with this changeling named Lucas, who is a leopard shifter. And the reason that they pair up together is because there's been a Psy killer on the loose that has been killing changeling women. And the changelings obviously want justice, and so in order to prevent like a flat-out war happening between the Psy and the changelings, they form this like project together where Lucas and Sasha will work together to figure out who the killer is. And so while Sasha is on this case with Lucas, she really tries to hide any sort of emotional personality from her peers, her boss, her mentors, her family. But Lucas can kind of tell that something's going on, especially because changelings have this very deep sense of emotion and heightened awareness of other people's emotions. Lucas is immediately drawn to Sasha when they start working to each other and is trying to get under her skin to figure out like what's going on, like why does she feel not like the other side that he's interacted with in his life. One of the ways that he does that is that when he sleeps, he has these dreams of Sasha, that she is a like living, breathing, emotional human like the rest of them. And what he doesn't realize is that that version of Sasha that he's seeing in his dreams is actually the real Sasha, because again, Psy have the ability to like infiltrate people's minds and connect with each other, because again, Psy have the ability to connect with other people's minds. So because of this whole storyline of like Lucas pursuing Sasha and like flirting with her and trying to get this rise out of her, you get a lot of very flirty and delicious scenes. Their dynamic is very much like golden retriever boy and black cat girl, and just like seeing the yearning and longing between the two of them was so good, because they are technically in this like forbidden romance relationship. And as mentioned, because this is a shifter romance, you do get this concept of mates and everything. So if you're someone who likes mates and werewolf shifters and some of the vibes in like Bride by Ali Hazelwood, but you've never really delved into this genre before, Melanie Singh is a classic in this genre. I highly recommend her and this series. And then some of the other short stories that I read in Whisper of Sin and Wild Invitation include other romances between changelings and humans and Psy. One of the romances follows a human and a leopard or panther shifter. I'm forgetting exactly which one. The human, her name is Rhea, she gets attacked one day in Chinatown in San Francisco, and Emmett is the changeling who's assigned to protect her and sort of be her bodyguard, and the two of them like fall in love through that process. That was very cute. Another one follows a human school teacher named Annie, who is the teacher of one of the kids from Lucas's changeling pack. One day this kid gets in trouble in school and Annie calls in his guardian, and his guardian is his uncle Zach, and Zach and Annie immediately have this connection to each other. Another one follows a Psy named Walker, who is married to a wolf shifter named Lara, and the two of them are already discovered that they're mates and are now like living in this married life, but they're kind of navigating this new relationship of being mates and the intricacies of Walker already having a child and learning how to have emotions and experience that sort of like physical touch and stuff with Lara after being under the silence for so long. So yeah, just like little stories with all these different types of pairings. They were all so well done. And one of the things that I feel like is not talked about enough in Melanie Singh's books is the fact that she writes different marginalized representation so well. So for example, in Slave to Sensation, Sasha is like half Japanese and half Indian. Annie, who is in one of the short stories, is disabled. She walks with a cane. Ria, who was in one of the short stories, she is Chinese. So Melanie like really writes from all races, all walks of life. There's a ton of disability representation in her books. 2 other books I read from her featured an MMC who uses a wheelchair and an FMC who is a Paralympian. And I feel like this type of extra care and research that writers of color put into their books is really never talked about. And then you have white writers who like attempt to do the same and then don't get it right, and then people will still like praise them to the ends of the earth, and the same energy is never given to authors of color. So yeah, that was a little disappointing, but it's one of the things that I love about Melanie and I love about her books. But anyways, I digress. I cannot wait to read the rest of the series. I don't think I'll be able to finish all of them because the series is so long before a Polygon, but I'll try to get through a good chunk of them. I'm so tempted to just like throw away half of my March TBR and like binge the rest of the series. Those were all the books that I read in February. If you read any of them, please let me know what your thoughts were. Tell me what your favorite read of February was, and I will see you for my March wrap up. I have so many videos that I plan to release over the next few weeks, including an Oathbound reading blog, which again, so crazy to think about. I'm also going on a few bookish trips, a Polycon included, so I'll definitely be vlogging those and releasing them. And then I still need to film my Get to Know Me / booktube newbie tag. It's been like 3 months. I've just never found the time to record it, but I just need to commit and sit down and record it. So hopefully I will get that released too. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!